now know, for example, that the only single factor that they've been able to show it's the safety is length. Displacement has no bearing on that. Beam has very little bearing on that. But length is the one single factor in all of the studies of the disasters in the last few years that consistently shows up that the longer the waterline, the better chance the boat has of surviving. There was at one time a big truth that traditional sailboats were safer than the more modern designs that were out there. Not true anymore. There was a time when traditional sailboats were easier to handle than modern sailboats. Not true anymore. Things that have happened with leading edge race boats, boats that were really pushed to the limit of what they can do, bad things happened. But these were boats that were built at the extreme ends of things. Normal cruising, performance cruising sailboats today are not that way. This just doesn't happen to normal cruising sailboats. And when it does happen, there's very often a reason why it's happened, and the reason is normally pretty extreme. Beneteau 40.7 that was lost out in the Atlantic this last year. That thing had hit a reef at 6.5 knots. It had not been repaired. It had been raced extremely hard. It had made 4 Atlantic crossings. This is a lightweight race boat, essentially. All this stuff had happened and nobody had even checked to see was there damage. It had several things where it was sitting in a slip where it was hitting bottom at every low tide. Every powerboat weight pounded on that keel. So collectively, this was a pretty tired boat that somebody should have spent some time before they make a passage across the Atlantic, and then they got clobbered out there in a storm. But then you go to the court of public opinion, they go, well, here was this lightweight boat and it broke up. This is a modern boat. This is what happens to modern boats. That's the piece of the puzzle that people don't have. Or like the conversation we're starting to have about the weight of this boat versus that Ericsson. I think both boats weigh 10,500 pounds. But because this is an easily driven hull, I don't have to carry as much sail area as that Ericsson. I can carry less sail area and still move well. And in heavy air, that becomes really important. If you don't have a lot of drag in heavy air, you're able to get by with less sail area. That makes the boat easier to handle. If you have to fight your way off a lee shore, you have to fight your way out through waves, an easily driven hull will go out through that much more easily and therefore be easier on the crew. That Ericsson was sailing on, I think, about a 21 or 22 foot waterline. I'm sailing on a 32 foot waterline. First of all, I don't have any pitching. There's none of this. The motion is much gentler that way. I'm a little flatter bottom, so I do rock a little bit more with the waves, but I also don't get out of sequence with the waves. So what happens with traditional round bottom boats is they tend to roll past the point that the wave changes shape much further, and so there's a collision with that wave at the end of each, and that's actually a rougher motion. So compared to early lightweight boats, where the motion was really pretty uncomfortable because of the shape of the hull, as we understood more about what it took to design a lightweight boat and make it a more comfortable ride, well, the designers designed around that. In the wake of the Fastnet, there was all kinds of testing. 1979, I think 13 people died off the coast of England. 5 or 6 years later, there's another disaster. Finally, there was the Sydney Hobart disaster. Each of these race scenarios are studied in tremendous depth, and a lot of information has come out of that. We now know, for example, that the only single factor that they've been able to show it's the safety is length. Displacement has no bearing on that. Beam has very little bearing on that. But length is the one single factor in all of the studies of the disasters in the last few years that consistently shows up that the longer the waterline, the better chance the boat has of surviving. And one of the things that designers decided is that the one thing that isn't penalized by any racing rule is motion. The smoother the motion of the boat, the less the keel gets disturbed, the less the rig gets disturbed, and so the boat performs better. What filtered out of that was that boats all of a sudden have better motion comfort than they ever had, even though they are comparatively light.